you so much for being part of my vlog. I was wondering if we can talk a little bit about what's going on with regards to women, especially during pandemic. We thought that what started in March would soon tide over, but it seems like it's an ongoing thing, and it looks like it'll keep going on for some more time.
Actually, it didn't start in March. It started much earlier. Our government recognized it in March, though at least personally, some of us, have been preparing it for it from January itself because we knew we are not going to escape from it. See, not just the pandemic. Any issue, if you take, for instance, say there's an armed conflict, or say there is some natural calamity, though I wouldn't even call natural calamity because most of them are human induced. Everything has always impacted disproportionately the women, and this will continue to happen. So the pandemic itself is not any different. There are a whole lot of other laws that are that impact women. For instance, even your health, even your not just reproductive health, even your general health, your right to health is impacted. How do I access contraceptives? Or I do not want to have this child right now, I would like to have this child aborted. Or even access to medicines, then access to education, especially for young girls. So when you're talking about women, we need to include girls as well. So there is a whole lot of things that get impacted in terms of health crisis, but it impacts women more because even in terms of food, especially in poorer households, the woman is the last person who eats, and of course she would definitely compromise on the quantity she takes in. That happens during normal times, but during a pandemic, it's more important that you eat nutritious food. So these are the ways the corona pandemic has impacted women, especially from communities like ours, country like ours.
Laws that do get passed, that is specifically related to women, I mean, they don't get passed overnight. There is so much of struggle that goes behind getting a law passed that is specifically for a oppressed or a minority community. So could you talk a little bit about what goes behind making laws that are specific to women?
See, it hasn't been easy. For instance, we all know of this dowry issue that is highly prevalent. It wasn't even accepted that this was so systemic, that is, it's so part of the system, and there should be ways and means of addressing it through a law. It was just brushed aside as a social evil. It was only in 1961, and that didn't happen overnight, as you were saying. Nothing happened overnight. There was a lot of efforts put in by women's groups, women's activists, and others, and that's why we had in 1961 the Dowry Prohibition Act, and where no longer it was seen as a social evil, and but it was recognized, and a law was enacted to address the issue of dowry. So that is why under the Dowry Act you have a definition of what is dowry, though we are not very happy with the definition per se because it does not bring in everything. It penalized people who give dowry, person who takes dowry, a person who abets the taking of dowry, or person who demands dowry. So all this was introduced into the law, and then this whole legislation came in. And from 61 to now, not that there has been less number of dowry cases, or not that the practice itself has been abolished. Yet another law that came in after a lot of, after court intervention, I would say, although the court intervention came about after groups took up the case. The case of, I'm referring to the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act, which is Act of 2013. There's the Supreme Court judgment of Vishakha versus State of Rajasthan. The judgment itself was decided in 1997. But how the judgment came about, we need to know a little history so that we know how this act itself came about. See, this Vishakha itself is a women's organization, aided with other women's organizations, took up this public interest litigation before the Supreme Court under the Article 32 of the Constitution of India. And what happened actually was this lady, Banwari Devi, in Rajasthan, who was working in the community, And so they thought this lady needs to be taught a lesson, because if she were to go about, asking girls to go to schools and getting educated, then, and even going to the extent of stopping child marriages, then they are at a real risk of not finding young girls as brides. So this lady was gang raped. She was taught, according to them, taught a lesson, and so she was gang raped. Shockingly, the lower court didn't find in her favor. So seeing her turmoil, seeing the injustice meted out to Banwari Devi, the women's groups filed a petition before the Supreme Court, and that's how the whole question of sexual harassment at workplace came about. And in the Vishaka case, the Supreme Court laid down some guidelines. Those guidelines are the ones which have been incorporated into the Act 2013 called the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act. So here again, intervention of the women's group culminating in a Supreme Court judgment which led to the passing of the Act in 2013, 97 to 2013. Yet another thing very close to home is, you may remember Sarika Shah. She was a young college girl, stepped out of college, walking down the pavements, some guys going around in an auto, pulled a dupatta, harassed us, banged her head against some object, some concrete, and after some time she even succumbed to the injury, and in other words, she died. So this led to a lot of hue and cry. So again, another knee-jerk reaction. So the Tamil Nadu prohibition of harassment of women came about after the Sarika Shah death and harassment episode. The last one I thought I should refer is because it's more recent, and we can refer to it or relate to it more easily, is after the Nirbhaya death in 2012 came the Criminal Law Amendment Act in 2013. After that also we've had amendments, but this 2013 amendment brought in a lot of changes wherein they introduced more offences. For instance, acid attacks were brought in as an offence. Voyeurism was an offence, stalking became an offence, so harassment became an offence. So all these came within the purview of the Criminal Law Amendment Act. These laws came about after a particular incident, after a lot of pressure from groups, and in response to that, these judgments came. So,
what are the different laws, and what exactly do these acts protect women from?
What I'm going to be speaking on laws is not exhaustive. I've only chosen a few laws, and even in those laws, I would only be allowing you a glimpse into each of the laws, because it's not possible to, engage in depth of each law within this short time span. Let's look at each of these articles which relate to women per se. Article 14, it says, state is not to deny to any person equality before law or the equal protection of laws. So when we talk about women's discrimination, any case if you have in mind, be it like even the Sabarimala case, that is the review that's going to come up, or say when the LGBT community, when 377 section of the IPC was decriminalized, or when you talk about adultery as an offense, all these cases, Article 14 would have been read into, because equality is what is violated. The fundamental right to equality is violated. So Article 14 has two components. It says equality before law and the equal protection of the laws. Those two things are very crucial. That means, like when two people are equal, they need to be treated equally. But when two people are not equal, it is unjust, illegal to treat them equally. So that is the crux of it. But what we are looking at or aiming at, and how equality should be read as, is as a substantive equality. We do not want, when we cannot simply say, okay, by equality we mean all men and women are equal. But when you mean men and women are equal, that means definitely women are not going to get, it's not a level playing field, and women are certainly going to be the losers. So that is why we need to have this first component of equality of opportunity. So it is okay if you say men and women are equal, but are there opportunities? Is there access to for getting those opportunities? Those are the questions that we need to look and examine. The second component that is important is, and that is the reason why we are having so many problems today, despite laws, despite judgments, is operationalism. It is not enough if the government, be it the state or the central, bring out a law. But what we need to see is that the law itself that has been enacted results in something tangible. Maybe I will just give you one example of a case law, which is pretty old, 1981, but a very famous case of Air India versus Nargish Mirza. But here, interestingly, Air India brought in three criteria for having women in employment. One of it was like after a woman turns 35, she cannot continue in work. If she gets married, she cannot continue in work. And if she becomes pregnant, she cannot continue in work. This is the regulation or the notification that came about. And beyond this point, their reasoning for this is like after pregnancy, women tend to put on weight, your waistline becomes broad, and then you will not be able to walk down the aisle. So this was challenged because it was certainly arbitrary, certainly discriminatory, of women alone being targeted, and this merely because she's a woman. This was taken up before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court struck it down. So this is one of the, most oft-quoted judgment which looked into Article 14, 15 and 16, all on discrimination for women. So moving on to the next article of 15, here it says, the state shall not discriminate against any citizen on grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, or any of them. State shall make special provision, any special provision for women and children. Article 16, again on discrimination and equality, where it talks of equality of opportunity on matters of public employment. Here again, no citizen can be discriminated once again on the basis of race, on the basis of caste, on the basis of religion, on the basis of sex, descent, place of birth, residence. And Article 23 is also important because it talks about trafficking, and most times it is only women and children who are trafficked. So it is important for us. So I will start with 304B, which talks about dowry death. If a death of a woman is caused by burns or bodily injury within 7 years of marriage, and it is shown that before death she was subjected to cruelty, harassment by husband or relative of husband in connection with demand for dowry, said such death is dowry death. And then there's another section about assault, like section 354, like assaulting or using criminal force on a woman. So that again is punishable. Then 366 like talks about kidnapping or abduction of a woman with intent to that she's compelled into marriage against her will or seduced to illicit intercourse, again punishable offense. Then you have section 375. There's so much that can be said about article section 375, which is on rape, because lots of things have happened, lots of changes have come about in terms of rape, from how it was originally defined to what we have at the later stages after the Criminal Law Amendment Act in 2013 and the subsequent amendment in 2018. 497 is whoever has sexual intercourse with a person who is known to be the wife of another man without consent of that man, such sexual intercourse amounts to adultery, and the wife is not punished as an abettor, and the wife of the other man can also not give a complaint. So the man alone can give a complaint against the partner or whatever with whom she's having an illicit relationship. But thankfully, this provision is gone. So it is no longer criminalized. If the person is aggrieved by an act of adultery, of course, the recourse is the marriage is broken and you can go in for divorce. There's nothing, it's not like anything immoral is being practiced. It is just that it is no longer being criminalized. And then 498A again, through an amendment in 1983, it says whoever being husband or relative of husband of a woman subjects such woman to cruelty, again punishable with imprisonment up to 3 years. Anyway, what it really means is cruelty. It does not have to necessarily be a dowry harassment, it could be cruelty of any kind. It could be physical, it could be verbal, it could be emotional, it could be any kinds, derogatory names, using foul language, or even silence, being suspicious of a person's character, talking ill of a woman's character, anything. So cruelty was has an expanded meaning under 498A, and it is a punishable offence. So now section 509, again important. With this we wind up penal laws. That is, whoever intending to insult the modesty of woman, utters any word, makes sound, gesture, all that is an offence under the Indian Penal Code. So when it comes to marriage, it is the religion that plays a part, because it depends on the religion that you follow, and accordingly you marry in under that particular law. If supposing both parties are Hindus, then it is definitely under the Hindu Marriage Act. So two people willing to marry under the Hindu Marriage Act, definitely their ages should be, girls should be above 18 years and the boy should be above 21 years of age. And then there should be consent from both parties. And then both persons should not have a spouse already living. If they have, then of course there's an offense of bigamy that would be attracted. And the remedies, I mean, what happens if if a person's marriage doesn't doesn't result in harmony as it's supposed to be? One is she can, before going in for divorce, she can ask for judicial separation. Divorce, of course, is ultimate because it completely severs the marriage. And if the man or the woman is separated, but one of the parties is willing to, go get into the relationship again, she can ask for restitution of conjugal rights. She can ask for maintenance. If the woman is unemployed, is unable to sustain herself, she can ask for maintenance. Then there is a question of custody of the children and all that. So all this comes within the question of the Hindu Marriage Act. Supposing two Hindus or two people belonging of different religion, two people of different caste, or same caste, whatever, but you still do not want to use the Hindu Marriage Act, you can still go ahead and get married under the Special Marriage Act, where any two people, you follow the procedures, go before the registrar office, where you have give notice and register the marriage. Marriage registration is compulsory, of course, both Hindu law in Special Marriage Act. But under the Hindu Marriage Act, supposing the parties have failed to register the marriage, it does not make the marriage, void, or it's that it is invalid marriage. The marriage is still valid, and perhaps even at a later date, you can go ahead and register the marriage. So again, the remedies under the Special Marriage Act are similar, like divorce. There is also a divorce by mutual consent in both places, under the Hindu Marriage Act and the Special Marriage Act, where divorce need to be fault. Then with regard to the Christian Marriage Act, any one of the parties can be a Christian, and you can get married under the Christian Marriage Act. And there, it is the Divorce Act that will come into play. Everywhere, when you seek divorce, you need to have certain grounds to show. You cannot say, for example, the normal myth that people have is, okay, I've been married to this woman for say 10 years, I've not had a child, so that's a ground for divorce. That is not a ground for divorce. There are certain grounds for divorce. For example, if the spouse is living in adultery, or the spouse having an illicit relationship, or the person has converted to another religion, or the person is subjecting the spouse to cruelty. So these are some of the grounds for divorce. So merely because a person is unable to have a child does not mean to say you can go and get a divorce from court. The Muslim law of marriage also, it's a contract under the Muslim law. You can file for divorce. And here again, the triple talaq, but through a very landmark judgment, very recently has been struck down. So men can no longer instantly pronounce talaq thrice and allow and divorce their spouse. So you have the Hindu Succession Act, which deals with property. I will just briefly tell you how succession comes about is See that's one word that we all need to remember is intestate. That is, if a person dies without leaving behind a will, then it's called intestate. But if a woman has, earned well, she has a lot of property, or has even her benefits, the terminal benefits, whatever, has created a will and has laid down her desires, then it's different. We follow that testamentary jurisdiction will come into play. But when a woman has not left behind a will, then how does the property devolve? So there's a blatant discrimination here again. When a woman dies intestate and when a man dies intestate, again intestate being not leaving behind a will. So when a man dies intestate, then the person who become his legal heirs would be, they have two classes, class 1 legal heirs, class 2 legal heirs. I mean, it's dealt with very elaborately under each thing, but when you look at class 1, you have when a man dies intestate, then you have his wife, his son, his daughter, meaning his children, how many children he has, and his mother including. So his wife, his mother, his children, all will be dividing his property equally. So that is class 1, and that's what happens when a man dies intestate. When a woman dies intestate, what happens is it will be a husband and her children. Her mother and father do not come immediately. If she doesn't have children and a husband, then the next person would be her husband's legal heirs, and after that only would be her mother and father. So that is to show how the discrimination applies. There is also the Indian Succession Act, which talks about which refers to whenever you leave behind a will. So all your testamentary things would go under the Indian Succession Act. And the Christian law of succession, here it is again interesting, because the widow is only entitled to 1/3 of the share, and the children are entitled to 2/3 shares. And in the absence of the children, the widow gets half, and the remaining half is shared equally between kindred, meaning brothers, sisters, and father. If the father predeceased the mother, only then the father's share would go to the mother. So this is again a very blatant discrimination in the Christian law of succession. The women's groups, Christian women groups and other groups has also addressed this issue, and a law commission report has also come about where it admits of this inequality in the Christian law of succession, because especially supposing the woman may have contributed to the purchase of the property itself. So we do not know. So lots of discrimination there. And with regard to Muslim law of maintenance, of course, it is the Muslim Personal Law Shariat Act that is Shariat law that is applicable. So here we look at say the Factories Act. Under the Factories Act, when there is a factory which employs more than 30 women, then definitely you need to have provisions for rooms for children and so on. And then there are also, like through the amendment of 2017, here again, creches were provided. Like when more than 50 workers are working in a particular factory, then definitely a creche needs to be provided, and a woman is allowed 4 breaks a day to go nurse her child and come back. So that is with regard to the Factories Act. With regard to Maternity Benefit Act, again through the amendment of 2017, originally it was 12 weeks of paid maternity leave. It has now been enhanced to 26 weeks of paid maternity leave for the first 2 children. But if she's going to go ahead and have a 3rd child, then for the 3rd child it would be only 12 weeks of paid maternity leave. There is a miscarriage, then she's entitled to 6 weeks of paid maternity leave, paid leave. So Maternity Benefit Act, it applies to women working, women who covered under the Shops and Establishments Act, women covered under the Factories Act, and so on. So when there are people when there are shops and establishments or factories having 10 people and more, then definitely this woman is entitled to the Maternity Benefit Act, and it is the duty of the employer to make this woman aware of such laws, so that she claims that 26 weeks of paid leave for the first 2 children. And not only then, it is not only that, even for adoption, when a woman adopts a child, she is also entitled to 12 weeks of paid leave. So adoption is also brought in within the fold. This woman needs to have worked in the establishment for at least 80 days for the 12 months preceding her pregnancy. So that is important. I think one important law that we need to look at now, especially because there have been lots of reports that parents are pushing their children to child marriages during the pandemic, and one of the effects of it, and a study has also come out that there have been several dropout rates, several children who have dropped out of school, and which is very alarming. So for this child marriage, we need to look at the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act, which is 2006. And here the age of the child is given. So if the girl is below 18, it would constitute an offence under the Child Marriage Act. And now what happens is when a marriage is performed with a child, where the girl is, let's say, 16 and the boy is much older, and this marriage can be annulled. Meaning the marriage can be, the marriage itself is not illegal completely. The marriage is still legal. The children born are legitimate. So there's no illegality there. But if the girl does not want to continue in marriage, and she can put an end to the marriage, she can go before the court and say that she was a child and so does not wish to continue in marriage. Since she is a minor herself, she cannot go in person. She can go through a guardian or a next friend and so on. But okay, after 18, she herself can also approach the court, but that should be within 2 years of her becoming a major. So when she turns 18, before she turns 20, she needs to go before the court and say that it was a child marriage and that the marriage should be rendered, it should be annulled. So that option is always there. But even when she's still a minor, the guardian or the next of friend can also approach the court and ask for annulment of the marriage. But if the girl is comfortable and wants to continue in marriage, there's no harm. The marriage does not become illegal or void merely because she was a child at that time. So that is something we need to bear in mind. See, not all cases of child marriage are forced by parents. Well, most cases, yes, when people are poor and when they feel the safety of their daughters within their small homes is not possible, it's best she get married. Or when they feel she's attracted to another guy and so let's give her away to another guy in marriage. Any person can approach the court. It is not necessary to the aggrieved person to go. When you look at Domestic Violence Act, when you look at Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act, it is only the aggrieved person who can approach the court or give a complaint. But here, it is any person, meaning if I see a person, if I see a parent or an elder pushing the child into a marriage, and I know for a fact that she is less than 18, then I can obviously give a complaint and stop the marriage. The court also can suo motu of its own, stop a marriage. So the court would be the magistrate court in that particular city or district which has the powers, and even the district collector, and there are also child marriage prohibition officers who are tasked to stop these marriages. The court also, if I apprehend, if I know for a fact that she's going to get married a few days from now, I can also go obtain an order of injunction from the marriage taking place. And despite the injunction, if the marriage were to happen, if the girl is forced into marriage, then that marriage itself can be rendered as void, meaning illegal. So that is something we need to bear in mind. And here is something where we can all play a role, where we can contribute to society. It is not like for us to step back and think it's a private sphere. How do I interfere? And I'm not the aggrieved person. Will they accept my complaint? But this, you can even make a phone call to the concerned authority and stop this child marriage.
Often there is this misconception that law and legal jargon and the technicalities of it are just seemingly overwhelming for a layperson, and that often puts people out of this whole realm of understanding law. But then the truth is that by understanding law, we are only empowering ourselves and the people around us, especially with regards to women that are probably are not able to, fend for themselves. There is a lot of responsibility and rights that a person like me can exercise, and that is only possible by knowing the law. So what would you like to tell people who often shy away from learning the legalities, or what's in it for us, and what our rights are and what our responsibilities are and things like that?
As you already said, it empowers us, it helps our relatives or friends or whoever it is. Even a simple thing as to lodging a police complaint. These days, you don't even have to go to the police complaint. You can even do it online. Those basics, at least we need to know. And while I say we need to learn the law, I also think it's the duty on the state as well to allow these things to go reach people. So it is the job of the state also to ensure that people understand law, because several children are subjected to sexual abuse. There again, you have a role when you know that a child has gone in and is being exploited. We can call up the police and say this is so and so is happening. So there's a lot of role that we have to play in terms of by knowing the law. There's nothing as an instant justice. I know our law takes a lot of time. Any act for that matter, not just criminal system, the civil system, the writ jurisdiction, everything takes a lot of time. And but instant justice, is not the answer to anything. But of course, delayed justice is also denied justice. I understand that. So every time there's an offense, something that shocks our conscience, like for instance, the Telangana rape of that young veterinarian, we immediately wanted, a very harsh punishment. Let us not criminalize everything. That is very important. Stringent punishment is definitely not an answer. Merely because we keep enhancing punishment, merely because we ask for death penalty, it does not mean to see that it is going to deter the offender from committing. There are going to be definitely more offenses. And unless we examine the structure of patriarchy, we understand the institutions that operate like that, the judiciary, the legislative, the executive, women's rights, women's equality, discrimination has not been internalized. It has not been integrated. It has not been mainstream. And beyond that, we also need to understand the intersectionality of it, because it is not all women, of course, are not equal. See, women of a different caste and a different religion have certain advantages. We need to reconcile that. Another thing, a rural woman, a urban woman, a literate woman, a semi-literate woman, a domestic worker. So these are all women of different experiences, everything is part of women's rights. When I talk of law, everything is inherent in all these women. So we need to understand intersectionality too. We need to move forward as women together. We need to move forward, and in the process, we cannot leave anyone behind merely because she belongs to a different religion, she follows a different faith, or because she is tribal, or because she is a Dalit woman, or because she is not able-bodied. So, in this pursuit of marching forward, in the pursuit of for us to acknowledge and accept all the rights that are there within the Constitution and all these various laws, we need to move forward without leaving anyone behind. Thank you.